Hey, what's up everybody? It's Kevin Keith. I get a lot of questions about my stick rig, my sound, and how I go about creating a sound, so I decided to address it in this video. That being said, this is the evolution of my stick sound. Okay, I play 5 different instruments. My first 2 instruments were bass guitar and guitar. I spent a lot of hours on stage playing those instruments, so I really had a good feel of just the energy and the versatility that's available in bass guitar and guitar amplifiers. So when I moved to stick, since there was no real stick amplifier, I just got a mixer with a couple of power speakers. It worked okay and it sounded all right, but it didn't give me the aggression and just that tonal power I was used to that I would get from guitar and bass rigs. I was a little stuck on this, so I reached out to Greg Howard, and to try to explain my dilemma to him. And what Greg told me I thought was brilliant. Greg said, you really want to design a stick rig based around the way you play. He said, when I listen to you play, there are moments where it sounds like a bass guitarist and a guitarist playing at the same time. You might want to consider building a rig around that concept. All right, that made a lot of sense to me, so I decided to build 2 separate analog rigs. One rig for the left-hand bass strings and another rig for the right hand playing the melody strings. Now, the problem with bass amplifiers is that bass guitar amplifiers have the mid-frequency scooped out. That's what gives bass guitar that kind of big, full, aggressive, warm sound, but it does not work with stick. So for the first component of my chain, I knew I needed to pick some sort of a bass preamp or bass instrument type preamp that gave equal priority to all the frequencies and didn't scoop them out. I chose the Yamaha PB1 preamp because it's one of the few preamps where it actually gives you the ability to switch the scoop in or switch it out. Now, I play bass lines fairly aggressive, so to keep the dynamics from getting out of control, I'll follow that preamp with a compressor. The DBX 160 is a great compressor for bass, so I chose that for the next tool in the chain. Now, the bass side of the stick now sounded great with just these 2 pieces of gear. This is the exact rig I used for my Keep On Keepin' On video. Here's a sample of that bass sound. All right, now from here I added my effects. For bass instruments, I like to use 2 types of effects: filter-based effects and modulation-based effects. Filter-based effects are tonal effects, like a wah-wah pedal. Modulation-based effects are like chorus, phase shifters, or vibrato type sounds. So for filter-based effects, I added a Line 6 Filter Pro to give me an auto-wah sound like the old Mutron 3 Funk box. Now for modulation-based effects, I use a Line 6 MM4 Stomp box for chorus and vibrato sounds. And to amplify the sound, I added a Mackie 1400i power amp going into an SWR Goliath 4x10 cabinet. That completed the bass side of the rig. Now, on to the melody side of my analog rig. Now there are 2 fundamental sounds that I like to hear in my melody strings. The first is a big sparkly clean sound, and the next is a warm blues sound with mild distortion. For this, I chose a Carbon Bel Air amplifier because it really works well for these 2 categories of sound. I like to hear my melody side in stereo, so the melody strings go into a Line 6 MM4 Stomp box set to a chorus sound to transform that monostick melody into a stereo sound. Now, the left output of the Stomp box went into a Carbon amp on the left, and the right output went into a second Carbon amp on my right. Now, to add sustain to solos, I added a Pigtronics Philosopher's Stone compressor right before the Line 6 MM4. And of course, to switch between my clean and dirty sound, I used a carbon foot switch that was modified to switch the 2 amps at once. And so, the analog rig was born. The first time I started playing through this rig, a single tear fell from my eye because this rig sounded incredible. The sound was big and warm, it was epic, but the rig was huge. This rig weighed over 250 pounds and could just barely fit into a full-size SUV. Okay, moving all this gear by myself was brutal and not sustainable at all. Now, remember earlier when I said I wanted to build my rig based around the way I played? Now, that's true, but I now realize that in building a rig, there's additional criteria to be considered, and that is the question of what kind of performing musician do I aspire to be? For example, am I a studio musician only, or do I play live? If your rig lives in a studio and never moves, then great. Use whatever gear you want. Doesn't matter how big it is. But if you plan on playing live, you have to ask yourself some questions. Like, will you play out periodically or often? Will you gig locally, regionally, globally? For me, the aspiration was to play globally, which basically means I need to design a rig that weighs no more than 40 pounds that will fit into this. Now, after experiencing the sound of my big analog rig, I knew that I was not willing to compromise sound quality for size. All right, how do I do that? I would have to build a high-end rig that was computer-based, which brings us to building my computer-based stick rig. Since I knew my size and weight restrictions, I decided to start with a flight-approved rack case. The case I chose was the SKB 3i-2217M103U, and that is a mouthful of letters and numbers. At any rate, this SKB case is a flight-approved foam line case that houses a 3-space rack. All right, this takes us to audio interface and patch panel. In building a computer-based live performance rig, there are hardware and software requirements. On the hardware side, I would need an audio interface and a computer. For the audio interface, I chose an RME UC. RME gear is high-end stuff. It's reliable, stable, and the build quality is excellent. It even has a built-in MIDI interface. The preamps sound amazing, and the sonic detail of the sound is consistent with that of large audio consoles that you see in major recording studios. All that power in a tiny little half-rack box that weighs less than 3.5 pounds. I mounted the audio interface in the rack, and I added a Neutrix patch panel underneath it. The patch panel brings all my inputs, outputs, and MIDI connections to the front of the rack where they're easily accessible. I now have a fully wired, ready-to-go, rack-mounted rig that weighs just over 30 pounds, and that's when it's packed inside of the SKB travel case. Cool, this piece of the puzzle is now complete. Next is the software and the computer. Now before we get to the computer, let's talk about the software side of the rig, because after all, the software determines the speed requirements of your computer. On the software side, there are 2 categories of applications you'll need. The first is host application, which is the primary application that kind of runs the show. There are 4 host applications I tested for my workflow: Gig Performer, Apple Logic, Apple Mainstage, and Ableton Live. All 4 are excellent applications, but I chose Ableton Live. And I chose Ableton Live for 4 reasons. 1, Ableton Live was designed for live performance, so it's built with an emphasis on stability, which is critical whenever you're on stage. 2, Ableton Live is highly scalable. I can build it to be just a stick rig, but Ableton makes it really easy to integrate vocal mics, additional instruments, and backing tracks. 3, Ableton Live has hardware controller options with the push controller series. Integration is seamless, it's simple, and Akai even makes some really nice third-party controllers for it as well. 4, Ableton Live is cross-platform. It works really well on Windows machines and Apple computers. All right, since I've now chosen my host application, let's move on. The second is a category of software. This category is called plugins or VSTs. For consistency, I'll refer to these as plugins. In simple terms, an audio plugin is just a computer-based version of a piece of audio gear. For example, here's a real guitar amplifier and a plug-in version of the same amp. The knobs and switches move and function in the exact same manner as a physical amplifier. The computer sees plugins as small software apps that attach themselves to the host application. This means your computer will need lots of processing power. Keep in mind, I am building a live performance rig, not a home recording rig. In a live performance rig, all the audio, all the effects, and the processing are happening in real time. Now, I'm a longtime Apple user, so my current computer is an Apple MacBook Pro with an M3 Pro processor. All right, plugins and VSTs. I use a lot of effects and custom presets, but for this video, I'll focus only on the core plugins necessary for a good fundamental sound. Let's start by building my bass rig. Now remember, the bass side of my analog rig was based around a Yamaha bass preamp, but if money was no object, my dream preamp is the Alembic F2B. The F2B preamp is a clone of the Fender Dual Showman amplifier. That's an old classic tube amp. One of my favorite companies for emulating tube amplifiers is Neural DSP. So for this application, I chose the archetype Corey Wong. A couple of reasons why. One, it's great for emulating Fender amplifiers and Alembic preamps. Two, it's got a chorus and an auto wah built in, so I don't need anything else. My bass sound is there. Let's hear it. Nice. Okay, for the melody side, I can use the same plugin for similar reasons. One, it has a great clean sound amp and a great warm blues amp. Two, it's got compression, chorus, overdrive pedals, delay, and reverb. All right, let's hear both hands together. Awesome. Okay, now, to control the effects like that auto wah, the choruses, the reverb, the delays, I use a Roland FC3 MIDI foot controller pedal. All I have to do is assign the on-off buttons of the stomp boxes in the plugin to actual physical switches on the Roland foot switch. Moving on, I use custom molded in-ear monitors, so I don't need to carry monitor speakers. And if there's a house PA, I plug my main left and right outputs from my rack right into the sound system. Now for local gigs that require speakers, I have a pair of QSC K12s. They can be placed on stands or just set them on the floor in a slanted configuration, just like floor monitors. All right, I think that just about covers it. I'm Kevin Keith, and thanks so much for watching the evolution of my stick sound. And please subscribe.